Hello, hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host Keegan, and this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And today we have a very special guest, and her name is Avery Thatcher. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well today, Keegan. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm super glad to hear that you're doing really well, and I'm glad you're on the show because you cover a topic that not a lot of us really know about. But before we get to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where are you from, that kind of stuff, just who are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Avery Thatcher. I live in Alberta, Canada, which is like the Texas of Canada. So yeah, it's a really interesting place, and it's currently very chilly outside. So that's why I'm in a nice warm sweater. But I started off my career as a registered nurse working in ICUs across Canada. I worked in adults and children, and I really noticed that early on, adults would find themselves in the ICU the majority of the time due to illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. So I decided I wanted to get out of the reactive side of medicine and start helping prevent people from ending up in the ICU in the first place. And started reading about all of the stress management strategies and the things that we're told to do, and the cognitive behavioral therapy and the meditation, the mindfulness, the yoga, the journaling, and all of the things. And so I was teaching this for a number of years. And then at the end of 2018, I experienced a very epic burnout. And it was really frustrating because I felt lied to, because I was doing everything quote unquote right according to the research and all the guidelines, but I still had this very, very epic experience of chronic stress. And so, being the super nerd that I am, I went back into the research and found the missing pieces of the puzzle. And that's where I really learned that burnout, which is the topic I think we're focusing on today, is more of an energy management issue than it is a stress management issue. And that realization changed a lot of things for me.
Wow. Okay. That's really awesome that you're focusing on burnout, because that's what everyone, I think, is dealing with nowadays. But what was your burnout like? Because I'm sure people experience burnout maybe a little bit different. So what was your experience?
Yeah, so there's actually 4 different kinds of burnout, but we'll talk about those later. But my version of burnout showed up like I was working full-time 12-hour shift work in a really busy ICU, and then I was coming off the night shift, and the charge nurse looked me in the eye and she said, "Oh, you do not look well. Go home. I'll mark you down for sick for your next couple shifts. Rest up, feel better." And I slept for 20 hours, and then 20 hours the next day, and 20 hours the day after that. And it was this slow climb back to a part where I felt functional, but there was also a lot of health things that I was experiencing at the same time, and then also a lot of mental health things, because so much of my identity was wrapped up in I'm an ICU nurse. And so as I went through multiple tests, lots of scary diagnoses getting thrown around, and big surgery to remove a huge mass off my thyroid, came down to this understanding that a lot of the most debilitating symptoms weren't going to go away. And I had to learn how to find that way forward. And I came to this point where I realized I had to change my name. I had to grieve the loss of the person that I had been for 37 years, and the thoughts of what I thought you would achieve, and all these different pieces of that puzzle of what I thought my life would look like, and realize that it's different. It's not bad, it's not worse, but there is no middle ground anymore. And so once I did that and changed my name, it was like I felt at home in my body again, where it had felt so foreign for a couple of years as I was getting used to these new diagnoses. So yeah, it was just a really big move, and definitely scary to tell people that, hey, I'm not even changing it to my middle name. There was like nothing associated with Avery in my life, but it felt right. And it was so worth it.
That's awesome. Well, not awesome that you had to experience the burnout, of course, but the claiming of a new name for yourself, a sense of agency, that you get to choose what and who you are. That's awesome, because that's also what I did. and I can totally relate, but I did kind of take the easy route. I just went with my middle name.
It's still not easy, though. It's still not easy because you still have to. Everybody that's known you as your previous name now needs to adjust, and it's tricky. It's tricky. It's still scary.
Yeah. And with all that sleep, how did you manage 20 hours of sleep? Because your body just shut down, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And so when we're in that really final stage of burnout, our body shuts down to protect ourselves. It's a fail-safe mechanism to prevent our body from failure. So it really just like shut everything down so that we could catch what was going on.
Wow. That's super interesting. And you said there were 4 stages of burnout. So if you hit the last one and you were doing all these management techniques to hopefully avoid that. Yeah. So what is it that you really found to be different than what you were reading?
Yeah, so it really is like I mentioned before, that burnout is more of an energy management issue than it is a stress management issue. And my favorite way to explain this is to use a metaphor. So I want you to imagine that you're sitting in a boat and that boat is full of holes. But it's okay because you've got a life jacket and a bucket. So as the water is slowly pouring into our boat, we're using our bucket to bail ourselves out. So we're lifting the water out, throwing it out over our shoulder. But eventually our arms start to get a little bit tired. We start to slow down a little, the water starts to catch up to us, and then our boat starts to sink and our life jacket catches us. So in this scenario, our life jacket is burnout. It's that catching and saving us from failure. The stress management and coping strategies, that's what our bucket is. But the truth is you have to have the energy to do them and to keep up with them and to make them the most effective. So they absolutely help because they provide our bucket, but we have to look at both the stream of chaos that's flowing into our life, all of those holes in our boat, as well as our own capacity for bailing ourselves out. And this is more of the piece of the puzzle that we need to look at, because it's not just adding more to your to-do list by putting in more of these coping strategies and stress management techniques, but more about really understanding what chaos is flowing into your life and what you need to make sure that that's manageable on a level that you can keep up with.
Okay. Wow. I really like that metaphor. Or is it an analogy? Or
I think it's more of an analogy, maybe a bit of a metaphor. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess the metaphor would be like, well, I think it's both actually. But anyways, whenever we're bailing the water out, it usually feels like we're doing a good thing though, right? Because we're minimizing the amount of water in the boat. So isn't that enough?
So normally, yes. And that's the balance that we want to get to, where we can bail all that chaos out in a regular way that feels sustainable. But often we, instead of looking for the right fit for all of these things and also managing some of the chaos that's flowing into our life and being more aware of some of those things, we just keep going. We just keep like, oh, I'm starting to feel more stressed. I need to do this, this, and this. Or, in 2 weeks, everything's going to slow down. It's fine. I can just push through till then. But it never does slow down, does it? So it's all of those things that we tell ourselves and the things that we try and do to be able to keep up with bailing as fast as we can, rather than looking at, what are those holes in my boat? What are the ones that I can plug? What are the ones that I can slow down? Or what are the ones that I just need to manage and live in and make sure that I have the capacity for managing that chaos with all the other chaos that I have control over? So it's really looking at the bigger piece of that puzzle, because absolutely our stress management strategies are very effective and very important, and all of our coping techniques as well. But again, we have to look at the bigger balance, because we need to make sure that we're not just doing a blanket number of things for a certain period of day because somebody said that was enough, when we're not really actually taking into account the amount of chaos that's causing that stress. Because our stress is really a default response to chaos, and it doesn't have to be.
Okay. I really like that. Default response to chaos is stress. I'm going to have to fiddle with that idea around myself, see what I can come up with. But it really does sound like what you're experiencing, well, not experiencing, what you're describing is taking that step back and being able to evaluate so much. But I think a lot of people really don't know how to do that, because nowadays it is nothing but grind and hustle, and you've got to have 2 or 3 jobs and this, that, and the other. And so I can see how people have more water flowing into the boat than they do necessarily have a even decent bucket, because I'm sure some people's buckets have holes in it too.
Absolutely. Yep, very true. Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So like really that's when it becomes more of the energy management issue. Because absolutely we live in kind of a wild dumpster fire of a world right now. Like there's so much chaos happening around us that we have to navigate that we can't control. And so that's also piling in on the things that we then have to do to survive, like having multiple jobs. And when we look at that picture, we need to think of energy as more than just like we either have it or we don't. We're either awake or we're tired. So there's actually 4 different kinds of energy. There's physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, and then this fulfillment energy. And so when we're really experiencing low physical energy, that's what we typically understand energy as, is that we just don't have the energy to get up. We need to give ourselves a pep talk to get off the couch, to go to the bathroom, all of those kinds of things. Then mental energy, or all of the decisions we make, the problems that we're solving, and all of the things that are going around in our brain, that's what really affects our mental energy. And so when we're really low on mental white space, if I were to ask you to step back right now and to visualize a single sheet of paper in your mind, just a plain white sheet of paper, and for you to write down every single thought and every worry and everything that's going on in your head, would there be space left? Or would it be like the tiniest writing that's like going up the sides and around in the corners and all of the spaces? Because if we're really using up every tiny little inch of that paper, it probably means that we're actually really low on mental energy. And often what this looks like is you come home at the end of the day and think like, oh, hey, what's for dinner? And you're like, I don't know, pizza. Because you can't think of anything else. It's really hard to make those extra decisions. Or you're batting your head against a wall because you're stuck on a problem. Emotional energy is when we have the ability to really allow ourselves to feel things without getting swept up in them. So it's where we allow ourselves to ride that wave of anxiety or fear or frustration, anger, whatever it is, without feeling like we're on the side of a freight train zipping down a field being like, as you're like having it take away from you. So you want to be able to have enough emotional energy that you can stay on the platform, see that freight train zip away and be like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to look at that later. But right now I can still stay in my, the more objective space. And the fulfillment energy is one that's really interesting, because when we're stuck in this grind, it's really easy to not see the difference that we're making, especially depending on which role we're filling in these different jobs that we have, and also the different roles that we have in our life. And when we don't feel that connection to a greater purpose, it can really drain us. And all of those other batteries can really get drained down by a low fulfillment battery. Now, not all of us have to be Oprah to be able to have a full fulfillment battery, but really learning how to tap into what makes you you and what really makes you feel good and like you're contributing and making your corner of the world a better place, that's really important. So one of the clients that I worked with, she worked at a major grocery store chain. She worked customer service. She got yelled at all day. And so she was just feeling like she didn't make a difference and no one would notice if she wasn't there and all of these different pieces. And so we were talking through that and realized that one of her deep core values is community. And so she went out and she found a free bookcase on Facebook Marketplace, found a bunch of free books, and she set it up in the staff room. So she created this community anchor where she could connect to the people that she worked with, the other people that also felt these same kinds of pressures, and the people being upset about inflation and all the things with grocery prices going up. So then she was able to create that community for herself. And even though her job did not change, she still felt like she was making a difference, because she could see books moving in and out. She could see parents taking books home to their children. She could hear about the stories of what they were reading together. And that really filled up the fulfillment energy. And so that gave her more of a balance to deal with the chaos of something like inflation.
Wow. That's really interesting. I think most people have a decent idea of the physical energy, like you said. I know for myself, I definitely know whenever my mental energy is low. And I've recently gotten in touch with the emotional energy. And now that you just described fulfillment energy, that one makes me go, oh, that's what was wrong a lot of the time in the past.
It's so common. And I think it's really trained into us in the society that we grow up in. It's so focused on output, not so much on what that output means to you. And there has to be a balance between those two things, because absolutely we can't just, hang around and smell the flowers all day. Like, there is parts of life that we have to keep up with, but it's still about finding that connection between those two.
Okay. Yeah, that really does make a lot of sense, because I've always thought that me going from job to job to job was me getting bored, or, just picking up on things too quickly, because my mental spiciness has it to where I pick up on things really quick. And so I will get kind of bored of it, but it is usually the environment that I'm in, the people that I'm working with. Those are the factors that I'm really missing whenever I move to another job. And then I look at where I'm at now, and I do feel somewhat fulfilled, but there's aspects that some of those other jobs didn't. And I'm sitting there going like, I'm cherry picking, going like, all right, I want this from this job, this from this job, this from this job. And it's all because they've been missing crucial elements, is what it sounds like. And it's that fulfillment energy. But that is, in my experience, not so much the burnout. That is something that was leading me to a burnout, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it can be. But I do actually have an example of when fulfillment burnout was the only kind of burnout someone was experiencing.
Yeah.
So this person was a concert pianist. They were flying all over the world to play piano for like the Queen, and they were playing in Madison Square Garden and all of the different places, and they were incredibly lucky. Like, on paper, their life was amazing. They were being flown to all of these different countries and staying in these beautiful hotels, being taken out to dinner in these beautiful restaurants, and they were getting paid to do what they loved and what they were really good at, and bringing this beautiful joy to all of these people. But even though on paper it looked wonderful, they had physical, mental, and emotional energy in abundance, they were miserable because they didn't feel connected to the difference that they were making. And so for this person, they actually ended up changing their job completely. Hard left turn into more of a corporate atmosphere, and it changed everything for them. They felt that spark for life come back. They felt that joy for the things that they used to really enjoy come back. They even found playing piano was enjoyable again. So it was really tapping into what actually that person felt fulfilled by, even though all of their other energy batteries were completely full. It was the fulfillment burnout that really affected them. And so when we talked about those 4 different kinds of energy, you can be burnt out in one of them, 2 of them, or the grand slam of all of them. But really, it's understanding what kind of burnout am I primarily experiencing, so that we can start focusing our energy there first.
Okay. So in that regard, is each energy related to a certain burnout, and then all 4 at once is the final coup d'etat?
Yes, yeah, it really is. That's where I call it the Grand Slam, because it makes it a little bit less sort of, it's like, yes, I hit the Grand Slam. Yeah, so really we can have physical burnout, when we've just pushed our body too hard and we can't seem to recover enough of that energy to be able to keep up. We can have emotional burnout, where we just feel irritable all the time, and we say things that come out of our mouth and we're just like, ooh, I want to eat that right back in, because that was a lot and I don't know where that came from. And then the mental burnout as well, when we just feel like we do not have the capacity to do much else than just binge watch series when we get home. And even at work, it feels like we're struggling to focus, we're struggling to remember things, our brain feels like it's Swiss cheese and there's stuff falling out of the holes all the time. So all of those different kinds of burnout are really tied to our energy, because again, burnout is more of an energy management issue than a stress management issue. So when we look at where am I really lacking in energy right now, that's a hint at to which kind of burnout you might be experiencing.
Okay. So say someone's going through a physical burnout. What would they do for that? Obviously, my brain says it would be resting, right? But it can't be that easy.
It's unfortunately not that easy, no. Because often that's what you're already trying to do. Like, your body is saying like, oh, it's almost 8 p.m. That's almost a reasonable bedtime. We can go to bed at 8 p.m. That's fine. And you wake up feeling maybe a little bit better, but maybe just as tired as you did when you went to bed. So really, when we're looking at physical energy burnout, we're actually looking at what's called pacing. And so pacing means that we don't go for the boom bust of energy cycles. We actually try and keep things level. So on the days that you feel really good, you don't like push it so hard and do all the things and be like, yeah, I got to make up for last time. Let's do this. We again set some boundaries for ourselves and say like, okay, so I feel really good energy wise today. So I'm going to make sure that I work for this little period of time, and then I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to do this, but then I'm also going to make sure that I do some things that I know recharge my physical energy in between. So it's not just sitting back and resting, but it's also actively trying to recharge that battery, to really like plug it in so that it has a chance to get better. Because for some people, physical energy gets recharged by going to the gym and exercising. For people like me with chronic illnesses and a disability, it just drains it. So I need to make sure that I understand what charges that physical energy so that I can do that. So it doesn't just maintain at whatever level it was, but actually starts to get better.
Okay. That's a really good clarifier at the very end. Charging it to increase it and not just keep it at the same, because I think a lot of people are focused more on homeostasis than improvement, and that itself is all its own difficult task. But whenever you do say pacing, it does make me think of marathon versus a sprint. And there's definitely times where a sprint is necessary, and then other times where a marathon is a much longer sprint. It's not a much longer sprint. That would just be a total. That would just be a recipe for burnout.
It would be, yes. If we're just like, I'm just going to sprint for the whole marathon. Like, let's do this. But I see what you're getting at. Yes, and I think that's the piece that I think a lot of us, again, are trained to forget with the kind of society that we grew up in, because it's so focused on like the consistent output, but that also means that we need more from you every single day. And when we're looking at pacing, it's not just what kind of energy do I have today, but what kind of energy am I looking to maintain for tomorrow? So that way we're not like constantly hitting the bottom of the bucket. Because then when you have some of those days where you're like super active and you're using a lot of your physical energy and everything, the next day often, or maybe the next day after, the next day, you know, like a couple of days later, is where you really feel like, ugh, I got nothing. I need to just chill. And so really looking at the more bigger picture, the longer term thing, and then also again focusing on those recharging aspects, that's really the missing pieces that I think a lot of us don't know that we even need to look for.
So how does someone go about looking for those pieces?
So the first thing is to understand that the word priorities was only pluralized after the Industrial Revolution. when assembly lines and machinery and things started to come into our general workflow, people were expected to multitask, to do more things at once, and to really get more things done in a single day. And so when we come back to the actual root of that word, see the super nerds coming out, the Latin root of that word, it really means first thing. And there could only be one first thing. And so by shifting that and coming back to, okay, so if I only get one thing done today, I want it to be this. Really helps change the never-ending push to keep getting your to-do list done that keeps getting longer as you continue to check things off. Instead, you're really giving yourself that ability to focus in on one thing. The next piece of that puzzle is to make sure that you sustain the energy that you have as you work towards that one thing. And then once that one thing is completed, it's not like you're only going to do one thing in the day, by the way. It's just the priority thing. And once you get that done, then you feel a little bit lighter, a little bit easier, and then you can start to slowly work on those other things. But it doesn't have the same kind of pressure as before. And so that in itself will help preserve some of that energy. And then another piece of that puzzle is to also look up in the beginning of the morning, maybe just check in and say, like, what kind of energy is really high for me today and which one's low? And so the high one, I want to make sure that I moderate so that way I don't feel low in it tomorrow. But then also the one that's really low, what's one thing which I can do today that's going to help me recharge a little bit of that energy? Not just sustain it, but recharge it. And so when we look at that picture, a lot of us are thinking right away, like, oh, I've got to go to the 30 minutes of self-care to like attack that one thing and really do good with it. And I really wish that I could meet the person that said you need 30 minutes of self-care every day, because I'd want to shake them and just be like, why would you put such an unrealistic expectation out there for so many people? Because how easy is it to actually carve out a solid 30 minutes in your day for this? It's impossible, right? Yeah, like unless we're on vacation, which, like, who can afford that anymore? So really with this mindset of that, I really encourage people to instead look for pockets of time. 60 seconds before you go into a grocery store, spending some time doing whatever it is that makes you feel like you're charging your emotional battery. Doing a quick stretch before you go back to work after going to the bathroom. All of these little pockets of time that we can find for 10 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. There's a lot of research that shows that those are just as effective, if not more effective, than a solid 30 minutes, because we're constantly turning off our stress switch. We're constantly managing that chaos throughout the day, and our body responds better to consistency than it does for the one big block at once. So really looking at it from those three perspectives can change a lot for us.
Wow. Okay. So it really does sound like there's more to charging up one's battery or batteries than it is just sitting there going like, that feels good in the moment, right? Because I do like how you said the one that feels more charged, you need to moderate. Because me and my impulsiveness would go, that's the one I want to focus on today, so I'm going to use all of it.
Exactly. And then now it's at 0 for the next day, and you're now trying to crawl back out of that. So that is the hardest thing to learn how to do, is to moderate that, because it's not like you're going to be. And I think like a lot of people, when they see that or hear that, they see this like reining in like a big horse that's meant to run. But really instead it's about holding it with a little bit of compassion and just be like, oh, I get to really savor and enjoy this energy today because I don't have to regenerate it. So I'm going to make sure I honor that energy without being like, let's do this. Let's see how fast I can get it to 0.
Yeah, no, I do love my manic days and all that, but afterwards they're usually not the best.
Exactly.
It's because either one or multiple batteries, I guess, would actually be depleted after a manic phase. But I do like how you were emphasizing the whole, we don't necessarily have the privilege to have 30 minutes carved out every day for the same thing. Now, some people might have it in their routine day in the morning, midday, at night, and some people probably do, and a lot of people probably don't, like myself. But I do like the idea of finding those little pockets of time to maybe do a breathing exercise, maybe do a quick body scan, anything that charges your battery. And that could be literally anything from the sounds of it, depending on what battery it is and who the person is. If that's
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I completely agree. And I think that some of the things that we can do can actually recharge more batteries at once, which is always nice because I don't know, I'm a high achiever. I like it when I can get multiple things done at once. So I know for me, like when I do a full day speaking engagement for the lunch break, normally people would go out and mingle and connect and all the things. No. I am in a dark room with my feet up the wall with earplugs in and an eye shade on so that I can just really recharge all of those things that I need to be able to be human for the rest of the afternoon. And so it's just part of the discovering a little bit more about yourself and just being curious, because a lot of the things that work for me may not work for you and vice versa. And so we need to make sure that we're not modeling our routines and our stress management strategies and all of these things against what somebody else said we should do, and really focus more on how we want to feel. Because the miracle morning routine where you get up at 5 a.m. and you meditate for an hour and do all the things, that sounds horrendous. Like horrendous for me. I would be such a grumpy human if I had to do that. So really focusing on how I want to feel not only allows me to make sure that I'm aligning the actions that I'm taking with that desired emotion that I want to generate, but also that I'm allowing myself to be flexible, because some mornings start earlier than other mornings. And that means that I can't go through this to-do list checklist every day. So instead I'm looking at, okay, so what generates that feeling the most efficiently? How low am I in that feeling? How can I make sure that I set myself up best for the day? And really, when we approach our day and our routines and recharging our batteries from that, how do I want to feel and what generates that feeling? It really gives us a lot of information that can make it a lot easier to do.
Okay. So we've been talking about charging a battery, or at least mentioning it, but now I have a question. If the water flowing into the boat is essentially a battery being depleted, obviously there's going to be some activities that someone could do that depletes a battery right away. What would one of those things be that could cause an almost instant burnout?
Yeah, so I think that's part of the conversation I think that we've not really discussed into yet, is that there's actually those different stages that we move through that eventually lead to burnout. So with the way that our stress response works, we have really a switch that's either on or off. We're either activated in the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system, or we're not. We're in the parasympathetic rest and digest side of things. And so a lot of the chaos that comes in can slowly ramp up that level of low resting, almost stress, until we hit that threshold where it's just like, there we go, my stress switch is turned on. And so a lot of the stressors, a lot of the chaos, the holes in our boat really just keep filling up that level until it hits the stress switch. And so a lot of us are experiencing this constantly activated state. And so really our stress switch was designed for this stage of alarm, which is that initial like moment where you feel that rush of adrenaline and everything, and then you fight or flight your way to safety. But because modern day stressors aren't like something dangerous running at us that we can fight or flight our way from, we move into this next phase of the stress response, which is the stage of resistance. And so this is where our body is able to either consume or create enough energy to match the increased energy demand of this constant stress response being turned on. And so it's really fascinating because cortisol is one of those hormones that gets a really bad rap in the media, like it's the negative stress hormone. But I see it as a superhero. It's really running around your body wearing its little cape, telling everything to tell your brain that it's hungry, that it needs more food. Because when we're in this increased state of stress, we're using up a lot more energy. So cortisol is running around saying, ask the brain for the high fat, high carb, quick energy foods, which is why when we're really stressed, we crave things like pizza and ice cream and those thick curry paneers and all of the things, because it has all of those quicker energies and the more sustainable energies like the fats. So the interesting thing there also is cortisol goes over and chats to the liver and says, hey, we need you, buddy. Like, we need a little bit more energy. And so our liver can actually create some of its own energy. So our body is then trying to manage itself. And so a lot of us do live in this sort of push and pull of the stage of resistance, where we're kind of figuring things out. And then, you know, it starts to get a little heavy and we're feeling in that space. And so when we eventually have too much chaos running into our boat, and we have too much of that stress, and the stress response has gone on for too long, or it keeps filling up, this is where we move into that final stage, which is burnout. So the stage of exhaustion. So this is where our batteries feel like those really old iPhone batteries that never really held a charge for very long after a while. And so it's like we can charge things, but then it just drains itself. And this is where understanding what burnout recovery actually looks like is really, really important, because a lot of people think of it as a circle. You know, when you start at the top, you're feeling your best self and everything's going well. And then it starts to get a little bit too heavy. You get a little bit tired, and then you crash into burnout, and your body forces you to rest, either by getting sick or, in my case, by making you sleep for 20 hours for a couple weeks. And then you slowly feel like you're coming back up the way you get a little bit more energy, and you feel like you come back up to the top. But burnout is actually more like a wave, like a ball bouncing down a hill. So we start off at the top of the hill feeling really great, and then we kind of crash into burnout. And then we recover a little bit of our energy, but we're nowhere near where we started. And then we crash into a deeper burnout. And then we come back up a little bit, but it's still much lower than where we started. And we crash into this last phase of burnout. And this is the collapse burnout, where we feel like we're just getting our head above water before life kicks us down. And there's like, haha, burnt out again. So really understanding that piece helps us understand where our batteries are at. Because if we feel like we can charge that battery and get up to a space where we feel like we're actually in a really good place, things don't trigger our stress response, we don't get irritable, we can make really good decisions, all of these things. But when we feel like we're in that space where it's just like you finally seem to be winning a little bit and life knocks you back down, you're likely in that collapse burnout, where we need to then look at some of those bigger things to be able to work our way back up that hill.
Okay. And so you called it burnout recovery, correct?
Yes.
So what does that look like? Because I assume you want to do it at a certain point during those phases. You don't want to do it whenever you're necessarily at the tippity top, and you don't want to do it whenever you're necessarily at the bibbity bottom.
That's what I thought you were going to say. I was like, I hear it. It's coming. It's going to be beautiful.
My mouth didn't want to say it for some reason.
It was worth it. Worth the wait.
Appreciate it. Anyways, so you can't do it at the tippity top, you can't do it at the bibbity bottom. So where do we do it?
So unfortunately, most of us wait until we're at the bibbity bottom before we do it. Because again, we're so focused on the society's expectations of us, our expectations of us, these different things. We keep pushing and pushing and pushing instead of catching ourselves. So this is where we move through the lapse, relapse, and collapse phases of burnout. And it's really, again, often in the collapse phase that we actually recognize, oh, I can't keep digging myself out. Because we feel like, again, we're in that wave of just getting our head up before we get knocked down again. Yeah. So the way that we recover from burnout, often from this collapse phase, is to first recover. We have to first recover enough energy that we can have the capacity to do some more things. And so that looks a lot different for other people, but really in general, we're just looking at how can I make myself come back up to one of those peaks where my head's back above water? That's where we need to just be so we can start. From there, we look to stabilize the chaos in our life. We're not trying to cut anything out. We're not trying to change anything. We're just trying to look, how can I stabilize this flow so that it comes in at a more predictable level? And by working with that, that then gives you a strong foundation to then build the next couple of phases. Because then we're looking to optimize our focus, our energy, our tasks, and all the different things of how we can make that, number one, easier for ourselves, or maybe even remove some of the things that don't actually need to be done. And so one of the clearest ways to explain this kind of concept of optimizing is to think about, if you were to write down all of the things that worry you throughout the day, and then you came down at the end of the day and looked at that huge list, there would for sure be things on that list that you're just like, in the grand scheme of this to that other thing that's on there, not a big deal anymore. So you're able to kind of let some of those things slide until you actually have more capacity to deal with them. So that optimize phase is there. And then the last phase, when we're digging ourselves right back out to the top of that hill or that mountain, is the align phase. And this is where we really tap into some of those things that I explained in the examples before. What really lights you up? What drives you? Who are you? And what can you do to structure your life around fulfilling those pieces? Because that's where we really feel truly resilient to burnout.
Is in that fulfillment phase, correct?
Yeah, that's right. When we're really just aligning with truly what fulfills us and what we can do to create that balance.
That's awesome. And so obviously that's going to look way different for every single person. There's no clear-cut way of you being able to say, do this exercise and it's going to make you feel great, or do this and it's going to be awesome. No, this actually sounds like it takes work to actually get where you want to go. But if I'm going to be honest, it sounds like work that is well worth it, because I know what burnout feels like and it's not fun.
No.
But optimizing things that, it sounds like a process of elimination of a sorts, except you're doing it from the what did I get done and what is kind of not necessarily like high priority. So we're looking at priorities, we're looking at necessities as well, because those would be priority, I would hope. But
yeah,
in addiction, you would be surprised. Some of those priorities do not become priorities. So with some people, I can imagine that those priorities are shifted and need to be realigned themselves.
Absolutely.
But I guess that would kind of show up whenever they want to do some of their recovery and their burnout recovery. But one of the things that I was had a question, you can't really do the big action to recharge your battery during the wrong phase of your burnout, though, can you?
Exactly. And so this is where some of us are in some of those patterns, like people pleasing and overcommitting and perfectionism and these high expectations of ourselves and all of these things, again, that are often learned beliefs. And there's nothing inherently wrong with them. They can either serve us or sabotage us, but we have to learn how to align those more to the serving side of things. But if I were to say to somebody that's deep in that collapse burnout, just barely getting their head back above water, and say like, okay, so I need you to dig into all of the reasons why you're a people pleaser, and we're going to talk about setting boundaries and all of the things, they'd be like, I don't have the energy for that. And so this is where we look to build up in those 4 steps. And of course, what that journey looks like is very specific to the individual, but at the same time, it does follow that same framework. Because once we've recovered enough energy to then work on stabilizing the chaos, you actually get a huge rush of motivation, because you can start to see the impact that you're having. But now, when we are thinking about that sort of big recovery thing and we're back up at the top of the mountain, it's not like all of a sudden you've hit the like gong of enlightenment and everything's great, the choirs are singing. Life is chaotic. It's going to continue to be chaotic. And so this is where I think a lot of us, think that we've gotten to this place where we feel good and we feel better, and then we stop. And then that's when some of those old patterns can come back in. We can get dragged back into different coping strategies, whether they be helpful or unhelpful. And this is where I encourage people to think of life as more course corrections than it is reaching that peak of the mountain, or changing your habits, or finding this like perfect balance where nothing ever has to get adjusted again. You're just like living the best life. And so often people talk about like 1% changes or small shifts, all of these things. But for me as a high achiever, those words in my brain are associated with things like meaningless changes, won't have an impact, going to take too long, all of these things. So instead, I rephrase it as course corrections. So a ship that was leaving Europe and it was coming over, let's say, towards the United States, and it was aiming for New York, with all of the wind and the currents and the weather and all the different things that are happening, human error, they're going to gently keep going off course. That's just how things are going to work. Life is going to keep throwing things at them. And so instead of waiting until they're almost in Florida before pulling a big, hard right-hand turn and going back up the coast to New York, the ship's crew are constantly making these 1-degree adjustments. They're just like course correcting as they go. And so really what we're looking for is, what am I aiming towards? What does it feel like when I'm back up at the top of that mountain, feeling like my best self? And then what are the things that I can do to course correct as I go? And so we use those concepts of course corrections as we're working through the recover, through the stabilize, through the optimize. We're looking at what are the course corrections that I want to focus on this week to slowly bring myself back. And really, even though it feels like those things are going to be meaningless, it is shocking how much of a difference they can make once you give them 3 days. And so for the people that are listening right now being like, ugh, course corrections, that doesn't sound effective either. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to overhaul everything and just try this whole new routine, this brand new me. Prove me wrong. That's what I say to you. Prove me wrong. Give it a try. Try it for 3 to 4 days. Prove me wrong.
Okay. Wow. That's a bold statement. I love that.
Nobody has ever come back to me about it, though, because the thing is it works. It is frustrating, but it works.
That is way too cool. What makes it so frustrating, though?
I think it's more of the mental game that you have to play, because you see like, oh, there's so many things that I want to feel better about, so many things that I want to fix, but I'm just working on making sure that I drink enough water. Like, it just feels like that first mental game. But once you get into like 1 course correction works, 2 course corrections work, then you're just like, ooh, what's the next course correction? How can I make this as gentle on my nervous system as possible? So that way it just feels easy and just flows. And that's where, again, the motivation starts to happen. But first, we often have to use that bit of the mental strength and mental toughness to be able to be like, all right, I'm going to prove Avery wrong. I'm going to be the one person this doesn't work for, and I'm going to send her an email and be like, ha! And then we'll see what happens.
That's awesome. It does sound similar to quitting cigarettes, because cigarettes, the first 3 days is a physical addiction, physical withdrawal. After that, it's all in your head. But those first 3 days, oh boy, let me tell you, I was irritable. I definitely, my mental and emotional batteries were at the bare minimum.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? You're in good company with that. A lot of people that I've helped through quitting smoking, same.
Yeah. But being able to focus and prioritize on one different thing, and I love the fact that you use course corrections, because, oh darn, that math teacher, I never had to worry about a triangle and all that stuff, but 1 degree makes a huge difference, like you were saying. And so those little actions that I do throughout the day, it's funny because that could be, say, the thing that makes or breaks the day in the end, just that one small thing. And I don't look at small things like that all the time because they're just kind of small. But here we're seeing that they actually have a huge impact on our day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
And our well-being. So
yeah, and I think it's so interesting just how our brain works, because when we think about like time travel, and if you were to go back in time, you wouldn't change things because it would change the entire outcome of the world that we live in. So like you can't make those small changes back then because it'll change everything however long down the road. But when we see that for ourselves in our own lives, we really struggle to accept that butterfly effect, so to speak, because we think and have been told that the only way to do it really is just to, again, do that overhaul. But it's really the smaller things that make the biggest difference. And we just have to give ourselves the opportunity to see that. And I think when we do the more traditional, bigger changes, it's really difficult on ourselves because it's really hard to actually keep up with, especially because we're often adding things into an already packed day, an already packed to-do list where we didn't really have enough time for anything else in the beginning. And so we're hard on ourselves for the number of times that we fail. Whereas when we're doing something more achievable, like these course corrections, it's a lot easier to find that compassion for ourselves because we're not failing. But in this conversation, it's also really important to understand that consistency doesn't mean frequency. Because when we are trying to make these course corrections, or even when we make some of those bigger changes, we beat ourselves up when we're not doing it every day or frequently enough. But consistency does not mean frequency. I do not water the plants in my house every day because they would not enjoy that. But I am consistent with it. And so when we look at that viewpoint, that perspective, it can really help us shift how we approach these changes that we're looking to make to help manage the chaos in our life and prevent that burnout.
Okay. So what exactly is the difference between consistency and frequency then? Is it just that you do it and that's it? Just like, so long as you do it, it doesn't matter how often you do it, you just do it? Or is it you do it whenever X happens or B happens after X happens and then you do this? Is it something kind of like that?
A little, yes. And so it's actually, it's kind of yes to all of those things. Because this is the thing, is the consistency that we're looking for is really driving us towards, like, I don't drink water every day because I want to drink enough water every day. I do it because it helps with my mental energy. It helps with my emotional energy. It helps my body feel better. It's kind of necessary for life. So I do these things, and that's really my like lighthouse at the end that I'm aiming for. And so when I notice that I'm starting to maybe not drink as much, or I'm getting a little bit more dehydrated, or I'm falling that off, that's a notice that I'm heading to Florida instead of New York. So then I'm going to course correct and be like, yeah, okay, so I'm going to drink a glass right now, fill up my glass again, and then course correct to getting back on. So I'm consistent in that I'm noticing when I'm going off course and correcting that. But it's not that I am setting alarms for myself multiple times a day to drink water, because I've tried that and it was annoying just to have this constant thing be like, have a glass of water. And I'm like, you drink this, my phone. You can have a glass of water. So again, it's really part of that being more in tune with what you're working towards, what that lighthouse is that you're heading towards, and then noticing when we're drifting off course.
Oh man, I love that though, because it really does call to having me search for what my calling is, what I'm in line with, and it does ring a lot of bells about actual like substance recovery as well, because all of these things are things that if you don't do in recovery, in substance abuse recovery, you'll end up slipping. One of the things that I said was recovery is a lot like an escalator, like walking up and down an escalator. Once you stop, you start going backwards, whether you want to or not. But it does sound like recovery and burnout recovery are really similar, but totally different aspects, totally different beasts. I think
Absolutely.
that they share things, but it sounds like burnout recovery is something that everyone could definitely get a hold of, because everyone's experienced some kind of burnout.
Absolutely. And I think, especially given the world that we live in right now, burnout is so much more prevalent. Indeed.com, which is a job posting board, they did a survey back in 2019 for just asking if you felt burnout, and they asked a couple of different questions to be able to help people that didn't know it was called burnout to be able to identify if it was. And they repeated the survey again in 2022 and in 2023. And so back in 2019, it was between 9 to 11% of people were experiencing burnout. And then in 2022 into 2023, it's more now into the 73% to 77% of people experiencing burnout. So it's not like if you're thinking you might be feeling this, that you're alone. You're in the majority. And it's just, again, really how we've been taught to handle the chaos, and also just the kind of chaos accessibility that we have now with social media, with traditional media, with the conversations that we have, with how connected we are all the time. With, you know, when I grew up, my teacher was always saying, like, you need to learn how to do this math because you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket. But I've got a calculator and an encyclopedia and everything in my pocket all the time. So it's just how our world evolves is not inherently bad. Capitalism is not inherently bad. It's just we have to learn how to navigate within the system. And so again, it's just that ship needs to course correct as new things get added that can keep throwing us off course. Because it's not, again, so much as like you find this perfect bubble, but that you're aware of when you need to be coming back on course so you can stay consistent with what you're aligned to do.
Oh, wow. That, man, you just hit all those like little tiny nails right on the head with all that. But we are nearing the end of this episode. But the thing is, I feel like there's a whole lot more of a conversation that we can have, but I don't want to try to go into it and then interrupt like any other thought process that might have gone along with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Because now I have something to kind of mull over in my brain, see what I can optimize, see what batteries I can sit there and charge a little bit more, and then maybe I can actually have a little bit more of a, not dialogue, but more of a experiences to kind of throw at you and just be like, hey, this is what I tried. Like, how bad or good did I do?
Yeah, absolutely. There is one thing that you said there that I just really want to highlight. How bad or good did I do? When a ship gets pushed off course, it doesn't say like, ooh, I'm a bad ship. It just says, oh, I'm off course. So part of the journey really looks into becoming more objective and just being like, all right, well, that's served, but that's sabotaged. How can I bring this thing back over into the serving side of things? Because we don't, again, have emotional associations with serving versus sabotaging as much as we do as I was good or I was bad. So really just being gentle with yourself in those experiences. Because it's not that you doing something is doing something wrong if it doesn't affect or do the effect that you're looking for. It's information.
Fair enough. I'll have to keep that in mind, and I really appreciate that. But real quick, do you have any shout outs for yourself or anyone that you want to give before we end this episode?
Sure. So there's two things which I want to leave you with. Number one, if you're feeling like you might be in burned out or you're not even sure, if you go to my website, I've got bunches of free resources for you there, including a quiz that can help you figure out, number one, what is your risk of burnout? And then also, what should your next step be? Because I don't believe in just saying like, hey, you're burnt out. Good luck. Of course, I give you some direction of where your first course correction could be. But then also, if you only get one thing from this episode, I really want it to be this. That always do your best doesn't mean always be perfect. Because your best is going to change moment to moment, day to day. And giving your best is all you can ask for. So always do your best doesn't mean always be perfect. You're not falling short. You're doing your best.
I love that. I appreciate that too, because I think I need that reminder a lot more often than I get it.
That's fair. That's fair. And I literally have a sticky note on my monitor that says that, because I also need the reminder. It just depends on which thought patterns we have really deeply ingrained in us and which ones really drive the decisions we make. So it's important to have reminders like that.
Yeah. I need to get some sticky notes for my computer. I just realized I don't have any. Maybe that's why I forget.
They're great.
So
Highly recommend.
But I hopefully assume that we can see you back on the show in the near future. Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. But man, I've got questions just piling up. But the thing is that they're coming in like 3 at a time, so I'm not really sure. I don't think I have one that is good to end with. But man, I just got to thank you again, because burnout recovery is something that I think a lot of people really need to learn about. So, with this, I just want to say to everyone out there, go check out, it's becomingavery.com, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yep. Everyone go check out becomingavery.com. Figure out if you're at risk for burnout or what next step you need to do. And just check out this episode on retrievingsanity.com at YouTube, Spotify, and you'll find all of her links there as well. So
sounds good.
Thank you for listening on WDJY 99.1 FM. This has been Keegan. We'll see y'all next week. Shalom.